sucking down some water. One thing I've learned over the years, when you reach a certain age and you don't get enough water, you pay for it the next day. Does it look like I just woke up? Yeah, looks like I just woke up. I did. Well, no, about an hour ago. 3:30 in the morning, dog has to go out. I have no idea why. I just know he does. Part of it is during the winter, all winter long. 3 o'clock, 3:30 was the time I had to get up to stoke the fire, or it goes out. We have a small wood stove, and if I can get all my wood at 20 inches, it tends to last till 3 or 3:30 very nicely, maybe even to 4. So sometimes I can sleep in. But trying to change the dog's habit, that's something else altogether. All right, some ideas on your converting your tractors over to 12 volt for antiques. I'm just going to throw out some thoughts and ideas here for you to think about as you draw your wiring diagram. Because I had a fellow come on and ask, he says, well, give me your wiring diagram, then I'll just copy that. Sorry, guys, don't got one. You say, why? I said, well, for nearly 50 years, I've wired things as I had parts to do it. That's what makes the difference. I've never had a lot of money, never made a lot of money. I always had to struggle through to get things done. In fact, in one case, I was going to rewire an entire car, a 67 Plymouth Belvedere, and all I was going to do was take a roll of yellow wire that turned out to be house wire. It normally cost 20 some bucks, and I got the whole roll for 10 because some guy knew me and was nice enough to give me a break. I wish I remembered his name, but I can't remember the name of the outfit that I bought it from, but it was on Old Vestal Road, as we used to call it. And they moved over to Johnson City years later. Anyway, well, I bought a car. I forgot what it was, 65 bucks or something. 100 bucks, I don't know what it was, but it was to be my car to learn on. How to learn brakes and transmissions and cylinder heads, engines, carburetors. I probably spent $400, $300, $350, I think it was, I figured out on the thing. Then my mother had a complete scream fit, get that thing out of my driveway, so I junked it. And then she turned around and said, well, I didn't want you to do that. And I looked at her and said, then how else was I going to get rid of it? Nobody wants to buy a car like that. And you're screaming, stop running the car while people were complaining you were running the engine without a proper exhaust system. I said, yeah, because I was trying to put one on it, but you kept demanding more money out of my pay, what little pay I got. So end of story. So I've been playing with this stuff for quite a long time. That was 16 back then, I think. That was my hope, that would be my first car on the road. Y-block, canted valve 318, Stromberg 2-barrel carburetor. Made a mistake, though. Everybody told me aviation former gasket's a wonderful thing, so I put it all over the head gasket. Now I know years later, no. That's the wrong thing. But for me, it would have been good in education. Learned about torque wrenches and torque patterns. So why am I talking about that with this? Just to give you an idea how far back I go playing with this stuff. When I bought the car, 16, I would have been 1975, 76, 15, 16 years old. In that neighborhood, and I might have been older, but that was right around then, long after my father died. My mother was way off her rocker. She was nuts before, and after my father died, she was clinical. So I needed something to do. Anyway, over the years I learned some of the basic principles. Let's start with one of the most basic. Volts equals amps times ohms. See, what's that good for? Actually, it's good for quite a bit. You want to know how much volts to drive through a system. And you say, but for most of you, we'll never need that. But there are times that you'll be calculating and troubleshooting certain things, and you'll take that formula, V equals AR. I say AR, they put it V equals IR, which is volts equals induction times resistance. So I change it to V equals AR, volts equals amps times resistance, which is in ohms, which you could actually say volts equals amps times ohms. Oh, yeah, but if you know what the resistance is and you know what the voltage is you have, then you know how much is going across the wire that you're dealing with. Unless, of course, you're dealing with LED lights. That's another, because that has a whole little induction pack to run the LED light. That's a different world. You just have to go look. There's the rating. It takes 1.5 amps. You know, your 16 gauge wire is more than enough to carry that. Now, let's say you're looking at your wiring and you're, well, what size wire do I use? Believe it or not, walk through a hardware store or look online on Amazon and type in extension cord 16 gauge wire. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. That's right. 12 volts, 120 volts, 240 volts. The size of the wire is for the amperage. It changes slightly for the volts, yes. Why does it? Well, because 240 volts can carry 5 amps on a smaller wire because it can push it through. But the problem is heat loss. There's more resistance in a smaller wire, but it can toss it through there pretty well. And that's one of the reasons you'll see your overhead power lines. Yeah, they're huge, but when you consider there's some of them up there, the stanchions that are 300, 400, 500 feet high, why you can't hardly see the wire, because it's 2 million volts sending it through there. Voltage loss, amperage isn't loss. So that's where some of the inefficiency is on all of this. So wire size changes just for that. Dogs are getting restless. It's getting near time to get Debbie up. So what I want to throw at you is just an idea of basic wiring. When you're doing a 12 volt conversion, almost everything is 60 horse and under. So this will work for most of that. When you get up to 60 horse, we'll start with battery wiring. Everything can operate on two gauge wire, not 2-aught, 2 gauge. Well, you're at 12 volts. And at 12 volts, the starter, if your starter for 6 volt needs 100 amps, for 12 volt, that goes up, but the amperage goes down 50 amps to do the same job. The starter wants watts. It really, in some respects, doesn't care how it gets it. But if you have more volts, 6 times 100 amps, 600 watts. Now, that's not exact for you purists, but if you're a purist, just leave the chat, okay? Just disappear. Because we're talking generalities here. It's an antique. You're converting it. So if you really want to be OCD about it, get out of the chat. I ain't got time for that. Remember that mother I talked about? Sure, you defined that. OCD. So just go away, okay? Next, think about it. 12 volts. Double the voltage. Half the amps. What do you got? 5 times 12. Or 50 times 12. 5 times 12, 60. Add the 0, 600. Woo! Imagine that. And you say, yeah, but I got to change the starter. No, you don't. For one main reason. You're spinning it faster. You have 12 volts going through a modified ignition system now for 12 volt. And you're going to be running better. So you can run the same starter. You just can't do long cranking. Because mainly it'll overspeed the starter if your engine's old and worn out. It will spin the windings right out of that puppy if you want to. So you do short 5-second spins. It starts, and that sounds, think about it, 5-second spin. 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, 1005. Stop. That's a long crank. So keep it at 5 seconds. If your gas engine doesn't start in 5, please fix it. Well, that too. Yeah, you'll get times that fire up stalls. Yeah. But it'll fire up instantaneously again, unless there's a serious problem. And you don't want to sit there with 5-second cranks, 20 times. 2 or 3 is enough. If something's going wrong, stop. Fix it. It's just that simple. Especially if your tractor sits a lot and you shut your fuel off. Oops. All right, so your starter wire, 2 gauge is plenty. Once you pass about 40 horsepower, now you want to bump it up, maybe to 1 gauge. And that'll carry more amps and start better. But I think you'll find 2 is sufficient all the way up to about 60 horse. If you run the tractor a lot in the winter, the bigger the gauge wire, the less the voltage has to push. In other words, less voltage drop across the wire when your starter cranks. Voltage drop is a key that you're looking to avoid as much as you can. But in some cases, I had a Briggs & Stratton that I converted to an alternator, tried converting to alternator because it was pull start, Oh, couldn't get it in there, so I just put the starter on with a little bitty battery, and I put on 10 gauge wire, I think 12. I can't remember which I had. Just it's all I had in hand. Then I found out later on that the starter doesn't draw much more than 30 or 40 amps, and for the brief few seconds it starts, whew, off it went. It's 11.5 horse engine. Now, just a few weeks ago here, I put a 24 horse V-twin Kohler in a zero turn machine. 10 gauge wire. So efficient starters, efficient engines that start well. There's a lot of stuff on 12 volt you don't need that 6 volt does. If you're a purist and want to maintain 6 volt, double aught. Double aught. Everything, double aught cable. Single aught is okay, but double aught's better. You need more. Lower voltage, you need bigger wires. Well, yeah, but no, you're carrying more amps. More amps, bigger wire. Voltage doesn't have much to do with the size of wire. The size, what you're running for amperage is. Starter wires, like I said, 2 or number 1 for going up higher. And we're talking 12 volts. Now, power carrying wires from your alternator over, single wire alternators and such, on these smaller tractors, you're talking 10 gauge wire, 12 gauge is more than enough, usually. Unless something where you got a bad battery and you're really running a 50 amp alternator, you better run a little heavier wire than 12. Better be running 10. And possibly if you say, well, all I got is 8 gauge, bigger wire's fine, doesn't matter. Smaller wire, you want to be careful. You can run a 40 amp alternator with a 12 volt charging wire if you keep your battery charged, because there will be those times the battery discharges, you get it fired, and now it's pumping 40 amps through that little 12 gauge wire. Keep your RPM down until the battery gets some juice in it, because RPM means lower output. So you can do this stuff, but you got to think. So 10 and 12 gauge wire for your alternator feed and your power feed up to your key switch and other accessories. Usually what I try to do is work off the key switch for everything. I have a tendency to forget headlights. Even though I have LEDs that don't draw so much power, don't care, turn that sucker off. Most of your key switches can handle 30 to 50 amps. My Ferguson has a key switch in it. So hot starter feed, 1 and 2 gauge. Hot feed from alternators and battery in further, because you're coming down on amperage flow. You want 10 and 12 gauge wire, and then from there 16 gauge everywhere is pretty common. 16, 18 gauge for most everything, including lights, will work just fine. 16 is good if you're using conventional lights, old incandescent stuff. Hopefully you've changed it, but you want it to look original, so you're going to have incandescent lights. They draw anywhere between 3 and 5 amps each. Yeah, that's why I switched to LED. Easier to get, for one thing, and I know they're not round, but they do make round lights now for LED, so it doesn't look so stupid. My Ferguson is functional, so stupid, don't care. Pretty lights, you betcha. So that's the one thing to be considered, and take all your lights, add them up. Every single light that you have external, because some of you guys, like my cousin was like that, he liked these massive light bars and put 150 amp alternators on his tractor. But you work during the day or drive school bus during the day and you do your field work at night? Snap. Yeah. When you're starting to get 500 watts of lighting out in front and 200 watts out the back, he was a happy camper, especially as you get older and your eyes don't work so well. Now, after that, you got your back lights and some other stuff. You can cut it down behind the dash stuff, your electrical gauges. You can go down to 18 or 20 gauge on most of those because they don't draw anything. Your backlights, you can easily get down to 20, even 22, 24 gauge wire just to put those little bitty teeny backlights in there. Almost all of them are LEDs. So look at your ratings on most everything you have, and that's how you can change your wiring. You're wondering, you can go online and look up a chart, or you can walk through Lowe's, look at extension cords, and they'll tell you right there in the package how many amps that they'll carry. The lightweight little cheap things, 18 gauge, you're talking 5 amps or so, 5 to 8. When you have 16 gauge, they usually tell you 8, 10, sometimes a little higher, and depending on how long the wire is, you'll see that changes. But still, it can carry so many amps. The problem is you get 100 foot, that's higher resistance, so The wire can carry the amperage, but you lose your voltage to get it there. Lights don't care, but anything with a motor or resembles a motor, that cares. And the longer the wire, the more the voltage drops due to just standard old-fashioned resistance in the wire. That's hard to measure. You'll take your own meter and you'll have a 100-foot cord and you'll hook up end to end and it'll say 0 because you're just putting minuscule through it to test the resistance. You start running amps through there, now you take a measure of voltage drop. And that makes the difference in how your wiring operates. So if your wire is warm, even in 70, 80, 90 degree day, the temperature goes up much more than a few degrees, your wire's too small. If it's noticeable, you can put your hand on it and the wire's warm, the wire's too small. That's just an indicator. So that's how you can do it. Starter, 1 to 2 gauge. Next phase up, 10 to 12 gauge for your power feeds. Then your standard accessories that are around the tractor, 16 gauge, sometimes 18, depending on what your draw on your gauges and such is. And your lighting, that's going to be separate from everything else generally. That's depending on your load, 16 to 18 gauge. Then you'll be fine. If you don't have any wires or lights on, it's really simple. You don't care. You're just running your gauges in the basic tractor. Ignition wiring, 16 gauge. That's going through there. The other thing I highly recommend when you convert, you're converting to an alternator, single wire. Keep it simple. Keep a disconnect on your battery on the negative side because now you're talking negative ground, positive feed. Check your ignition coil. Make sure that your feed from the key switch to the ignition coil matches the positive power feed, so it's got to be on the plus side of the coil. Change your coil from 6 volt to 12 volt. Don't use a resistor. Just replace the coil unless you're completely out of money. And then you want to put in, I think it's a 2 plus, or you have to get enough in there so when you turn the key on and that thing is running, that's coming into that coil is no more than 7 or 8 volts. 8's high. But you don't run electronic ignition, then you run points. Convert the coil to a 12 volt K321, K341, K301 Kohler old K series coil. And that'll take care of your problem. No resistor is needed. It operates on its own very well. And don't think that that little Kohler engine doesn't beat that coil to death. It beats it to death harder than a 4-cylinder tractor engine. Even plowing. Trust me on that. Those engines are brutal. So, now you've got positive, the plus side of the coil coming in, coming out to the distributor negative. In the distributor, set your points of condenser and timing. Take that out and put a Pertronix electronic ignition system in there. Follow the directions, and you will be a very happy camper. And on the negative side, either have a disconnect or disconnect it every time you park your tractor if it sits longer than a week, because that'll drain your battery down. Battery, you can convert to a lawn and garden battery for most of this stuff up to about 40-45 horse. You can run a U1 or U1L battery with 300 to 350 cranking amps. And if everything else is the way it should be, you will do very well. And even in the winter, you'll get up to 3 cranks out of that thing trying to get your engine started. When the battery's weak and been sitting, you can get up to 3 cranks. After that, yeah, you want a 500, 550 cranking amp battery. My U1Ls I usually try to keep in the 3 1/4, 350 range so it doesn't tear it apart. I hope that helps some of you out there. Time for me to, so the dogs are calling. Mommy might be up, so it's time for me to get moving. See ya.